All right, it is a brand new episode of the Quintessential Show. We are making sense of South Africa, be it the history, the present, the future, what it all means, what South Africa is all about, the stories that are making news in our country. One of the stories that hasn't made too much of a splash that I think needs to make more of a splash is this photo I'm showing you right now. It might look like the dark side of the moon, but it isn't the dark side of the moon. This photo that I'm showing you is 60 kilometers south of Johannesburg at a place called the Witwatersrand Hills, and archaeologists have been trying to uncover the cities of the past there for years, but now new technology has helped uncover a lot of the lost history there. Usually we think of lost cities in South Africa as being like Sun City, where you can go to the palace or swim in the pools there and there's a nice water park. That's called the lost city. But now a real lost city has been discovered in South Africa, and it's been named SKBR. But the hope is that it will be given the name Mfecane because of its Tswana heritage. Professor Karim Sadr from the University of the Witwatersrand, who headed up the project of finding this lost city, is here to tell us the evidence he has uncovered, begging the question why the Tswana decided to become an urban population around a quarter of a millennium ago. All right, that was quite the intro. Mr. Sadr, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Quentin.
All right, now tell me more about this technology, because this is quite new technology. I think I've seen it being used on the pyramids in Giza, and obviously there are a couple of other things where they have used this kind of technology. But do let us know about the technology that you guys have used. I believe it's laser technology that you guys are utilizing.
Yes, it's been used in several parts of the world. I heard about it at a conference that I went to, and I thought we'd try it here. I think we might be the first, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, for archaeology anyway. Mm-hmm. But industry has been using it for some time. What it is, it's the same principle as radar, which is radio detection and ranging. Airports use it to track airplanes all the time. Lidar is light detection and ranging. And it basically, essentially what we get is a plane to fly over the target area, and with a Lidar machine to bombard the landscape with really millions, if not billions, of pulses of laser light. And whatever this pulse of laser light hits, it bounces back and gets recorded. The precise position of that intercept gets recorded. So it allows for super accurate mapping.
Yeah, so this is like almost 100% accurate. You're kind of seeing what was originally there, correct?
Yeah, the thing it does is it hits whatever it hits, it bounces back. So it might be a bird or a leaf or an electric wire. Some of those points get all the way to the bare ground. And what they do, once the plane lands and they download the data, the technicians can separate the points into what they call the non-ground and the ground points. Now, we're interested in the ground points because that shows what's under the vegetation. Biologists might be interested in the vegetation. But anyway, for us, they wash out all the non-ground points. And then when they sort of perform interpolations on the remaining ground points, they sort of stitch everything together. They can show the bare ground. It's like a lunar surface, or one of the images visualization to make it look like a lunar surface.
Yeah, I think it's important to note for our viewers that you are a professor of archaeology, but I think people probably would have worked that out by now. And archaeology is very fascinating because I think we live in a country that, it's always up for debate, because historians have historically told us that some of these places, might have once been empty, So tell me what the kind of findings you guys have uncovered. What does this mean for historical empty land myths, or does this even play a part in the historical empty land myths of the past?
Well, it certainly does. It depends on who still believes that empty land myth, but I guess there are people who do. And then the question is, when they say empty land, do they mean the whole of Southern Africa or a small portion? But in any case, we've been able to show that this certainly wasn't an empty land. That's pretty clear. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, look, from the 70s and the 80s, the University of Wits has been looking at this area. Now there's more precision to this area. So I think, when it comes to empty land myths, are people then considering, because like you said, there are some people that still might believe in the empty land myths. You guys were saying that this might have been a smaller town in the 70s and 80s. Now you're saying that this was a huge city. Tell me more about the city you guys have found. How have you made this determination? How big are we actually talking?
Yeah, I've just been writing a paper on this question of, how do you lose a city, basically, in this area. We've known about the site. I don't think the ruins were never lost, let's say. But I don't know if you've been out to the Witwatersrand or if any of your listeners are. It seems like an open landscape. It's grasslands with trees. It's a beautiful landscape. But the stone walls, the ruins themselves, are very well hidden by the vegetation. So from ground level, what happens, and many people see stone walls, they walk over them. You might see a stone wall in front of you and another one 20 meters away. But there's no place in the Witwatersrand where you can stand and actually see the city, the whole city. You can't tell if you're looking at one ruin or 50 ruins or 100. There's no way of telling from ground level. So in the 50s and 60s, one of my predecessors here, Revel Mason, professor of archaeology, he started the first aerial survey using air photos from 1961. So these are black and white photos, very good quality, very sharp. And you can see many of the ruins much better on these air photos than you would be able to see it on the ground. And he counted some up, and anyway, enough of those ruins were obscured by vegetation that he couldn't see the whole city, let's say. So for years, decades in fact, archaeologists were thinking that that place, although it has a lot of ruins, it's a series of disconnected small villages of not a terribly big importance. What we did know is that the Tswana had cities. We call them towns for some reason. People are reluctant to give the appellation city to these things. But Tswana towns in the Northwest Province from the same period, 200, 250 years ago, had been known since the early missionaries went up there 200 years ago. So that wasn't a surprise. The surprise was that there was one here. And what Lidar allowed us to do was to see all of the ruins that were hidden by vegetation. So suddenly where we thought, I think Mason had counted something like 250 ruins in that strip that we produced the Lidar on. And the Lidar showed something like 700 compounds, so like triple the number, double the number. So that made a big difference. And plus, it's not only just the ruins of compounds, but a lot of the architectural detail of the built environment is only visible on the Lidar, not even on the ground. So the city itself is about 10 kilometers long and about 2 kilometers wide. That's how much of it we've covered in Lidar. I think it's a little bit wider at the north and south end, and we haven't got full coverage. But I would guess about 20 square kilometers. Now, and it's divided into 3 quite distinct suburbs or sectors. And whether all 3 were occupied at the same time, how many of the compounds were occupied at the same time, how many people lived in it at any one particular point in time, those are very difficult questions to ascertain archaeologically. It's easy enough to guesstimate, but to try and make a good guess, a good estimate is difficult. So I'm hoping that I'll have a PhD student on that problem this year.
All right, now we've shown you a couple of images of what Professor Sadr and his team have captured. Just remind us, Professor Sadr, why we kind of seen a bird's eye view from the top. Is that because there's a plane that flies over and takes this image? Just remind us the technology that is used here.
That's right, yeah. The mission that was flown by this company in Johannesburg was a small light aircraft flew over the target area, and they bombarded the landscape with all of these laser light pulses, millions and millions of them. And they flew 2 missions in 2014 and 2015. But they're adjoining strips, and it's covered about nearly 40 square kilometers. So it's a very large area that they covered. The technology is basically that the light bounces off whatever it hits, and because the light travels at a known speed, it's possible then to get an exact position for the interception in 3 dimensions. And then when the plane gets back to ground, the technicians can download all that data. And what they do out of the millions of points, what they do is they separate out the ones that were returned by what they say non-ground returns, vegetation, birds, and electric wires. And then they keep for us the ground returns, which are the bits that we're interested in, to see what's on the ground beneath the vegetation.
Yeah, and then you see all of this at once, right? I mean, you're kind of seeing hundreds of years of information all at once on this photograph. So how do you now determine which year you're basically seeing when you look at these things?
That's a tricky part of the game as well. We know the time span of these stone wall structures, and we know that there were in this area 2 or 3 main architectural styles which had fairly restricted time ranges. But even so, you know, if you wanted to get down to let's say a 50-year window, a 50-year period, and show just that level on the site, it would be extremely difficult to do that. We haven't really got the right dating technology to give us that kind of a resolution on it. So at the moment we're battling with that a little bit. We can narrow it down to maybe 100 years, 200 years, but as you say, there are many ruins that are older than that, and they sort of are noise in the picture that we need to clean out later on.
Yeah, now there's certainty in terms of that these were Tswana people that were living in that area. As archaeologists, how do you make that determination? Do you cross-reference it based on previous findings that you've had? Because how do you now determine that these were definitely Tswana tribes that were there?
Now this goes back again to the architectural styles, and we know that some of those styles were essentially being built when the first Europeans arrived and visited these cities, these capitals further to the west of us, northwest province, and from their descriptions we know that they were dealing with Tswana people, and so we have that association between architectural style, but also this habit of living in an urban setting is very specific to the Tswana. When you have, for example, Nguni speakers further to the south, the Zulu speakers, the Xhosa speakers, their settlement patterns, they did build in stone not as much and in different styles, but they never aggregated into large towns. So again, that's a giveaway in that sense as well.
Yeah, now, earlier we were talking about the empty land myth, and a lot of people also, throw the Mfecane Wars into this, very debatable historical, discussion that we always have. So you, in the conversation article that you wrote, were speaking about the Mfecane Wars and the Mfecane Wars. So how do you guys make that determination that, and you're saying that the Europeans would have been seeing these Mfecane Wars play out in real time. Is that also true? Explain to me how you guys reach that conclusion about this, the Mfecane Wars, and there's evidence to support that these Tswana tribes were broken up by the Mfecane Wars in your studies. How did that come about?
No, it's most of that information that you're referring to that we also rely on is actually historical information based on basically oral histories and a little bit of written history from the first European trekkers in this area. We have, for example, from the oral histories, there's a pretty good reconstruction that the Ndebele and Zilikazi, they had their capital from 1823 to about 1827, just on the other side of Heidelberg. So let's say about 30 kilometers east of Queneng, very close by. And historical records say that, he would show up. He would basically give the local the choice: either they would be with him and they would become his tributaries, his subjects, or he would just chase them away or kill them or take their cattle. So the best oral histories that we seem to be able to shed light on this particular area is that a bit of both happened. Some people stayed, some people left. We can't tie that directly to the archaeology, and that comes back again to this lack of a high resolution dating mechanism. We just can't get close enough in dating to know precisely. But Queneng, the last phase of occupation there seems to be marked by burnt down houses. It's a very small sample of excavations we have. It's like three of these compounds that were excavated in the last 20, 30 years. And they all show that the houses had been burnt down and that the people left in a hurry. So all their pots and pans and the tools, everything was left behind and they left. Now, was that because of the Mfecane? Was it because of Zilikazi's armies? Was it because of another raid or a series of raids? That is impossible to say at the moment. I'm hoping a student or a series of students in future years will work on this and try to unravel the last days of Queneng, and basically to what extent, how much of it was destroyed perhaps, how much of it carried on. But the high resolution information we have about the Mfecane is coming from the historians. The archaeological record really doesn't show us that stuff in so much detail. The Europeans, it's another interesting thing is that this all plays within about a 10-20 year window, which is far too far too short a time span for us to pick it up in the archaeology just like that. But it shows that Mzilikazi arrived in 1823. By 1827, he moves further north and west towards Mariko district. And in 1836-37, the first trekkers crossed the Vaal River. And they start putting encampments, and then they build or they register farms. So by about 1840, there's a number of registered European farms, but they're all to the east of Kweneng. None of them are on Kweneng or in front of it or next to it, which makes me wonder, why are they avoiding that spot? But so far we haven't seen anybody write anything about the ruins of that place. Doesn't mean it's not there. We haven't found everything that's been written, obviously.
Yeah,
but it's not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting thing to say, is that, I mean, because the kind of readings I do, it never really points to a lot of the Tswana being part of this fight, I mean, you're kind of always focusing on the Zulus and the Europeans, but you're never thinking about the Tswana people. But what does this have relevancy to when it comes to the Tswana, the modern day Tswanas? Because now the modern day Tswanas are gonna claim this as part of their heritage, and I've already seen a BBC report where some of the Tswana are starting to say, well, listen, this is going to become a land claim thing. So what ramifications do your findings have when it comes to land claims? I know you said that more and more PhD students might take a look at this, but there's already clamoring for like land redistribution. Tell me more about what happens in this case.
Absolutely. I mean, land claims is a terribly complex thing, and it's really a legal issue, and lawyers would be able to tell you much better. From my very limited understanding of it, the law as it stands says that essentially the land claims are only valid for any dispossession of land post-dating since 1913, which is way after the destruction of Kweneng, way after the abandonment of Kweneng. So in terms of the current laws, Kweneng really doesn't play a role in legal terms. It doesn't. In moral terms, it does. I mean, you're quite right that the descendants of the Kwena are very proud of it, are happy to know that they had a large settlement here, but it's not going to stand in any court of law the way the law is now. Now, the laws might change, and but if they change, if the laws change and suddenly the government says all land is nationalized, then frankly the archaeology doesn't matter. It's not going to make any difference. But so at the moment, it doesn't play, from my understanding, in legal terms, it has really nothing to do with the land claim. In moral terms, it will give the Kwena what they already knew. They were here for a long time. It's not as if we're showing them things that they didn't know. They may not remember this specific city, but they know they've been around here. They got the graves of their ancestors here and there. So I don't think in terms of land claims it plays much of a role.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when archaeology brings you a new lens on South Africa, because you have a lot of people saying, we were here first, and you have a lot of people saying stick to the law and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, when it comes to firstism and we were here first, do you think that makes it any easier for the land claim process in our country? It's a very tough topic to discuss.
It is, because there's all of Africa is like this. There's no real barriers to human movement. And people have been moving back and forth from north to south, from south to east, from everywhere, all the time. So, at some point you have to say the first people here since when? Because if you want to take it right the way back, the first people here were not even Homo sapiens sapiens. They were Australopithecines. They're not around anymore. So at some point you have to say, okay, where do we want to stop searching for the first? But the Tswana, we know they're recent arrivals here as well. They came. The historical records suggest that in this part of the country, in Gauteng province, let's say, it's only the 15th century, 14th century maybe, and before that they were a little bit further north in the Limpopo Valley. That's from their own oral histories. So before that, who were here? There were other groups of farmers, also probably Bantu speaking, but we have no descendants to tell us, what did they call themselves. There were other people here, but we don't know exactly who they were. Of course, the San were here, the Khoisan were here. So yeah, it becomes very tricky. How far do we want to take it back to?
Yeah, I think that sometimes informs our political, world in South Africa, because everyone's trying to figure out who's a visitor and who's not a visitor in our country. And now to hear that the Tswana were much more present, I think to some makes them stand back and think, wow. there's a lot to learn in South Africa. But that's what archaeology is all about. I want to get your opinion about archaeology as a profession. Give us a little bit of a background of how long you've been doing this, and for people who are really, really hungry for the archaeological knowledge and they want to study this, would you recommend getting into this line of study?
Yeah, I mean, archaeology for me it's a wonderful subject, and you're quite right that it's for nation building, for people to understand the depth of their history, their place in history and in the land. There's nothing to beat archaeology, especially here in Africa, because the written history is so shallow. It only goes back a couple of hundred years in this area, so anything before that, it's archaeologists who have to figure it out. Myself, I started out studying economics in first year university, took an archaeology course by accident, and I loved it, and I never looked back. So I've been in the business for, going on 40 years at least. Wow. And I've worked in North America, Central America, in Northern Africa, many places. And it's great fun. I really enjoy it. It's puzzle solving at its best. So, and it's really interesting. No matter where you work, it's really interesting. For people who want to get into the business, right now, at the moment, the one big problem that we have is that 25 years since the end of the apartheid regime, we as archaeologists have failed to attract African South Africans into the discipline. I think, I'm not sure why. I mean, there are very few who stay the course and go on to get, for example, their PhD to become professionals. There are many more from Botswana, there are many more from Zimbabwe, but African South Africans, for some reason, have been hesitant to come in, and there are possibly many different reasons. Myself, I think, one reason perhaps is that there's a perception that there aren't enough jobs, that there's no money. I always tell my students, if I go to the government and I say, listen, archaeology is really important, heritage building and all that, and please create some jobs. They will say, okay, where are the black South Africans to fill those posts? And I'll have to say, sorry, they're not there. So it's a chicken and an egg problem. I think the first, say, 100 PhDs in archaeology who are African South Africans, they will have a job. The government will immediately open up positions for them. There's so many universities that should have archaeology departments, museums, all these parks that have archaeological remains and no heritage officers who know how to deal with them properly. There's a huge gap for people to take these posts, but there are no black South Africans, African South Africans who can take them. And the government's reluctant to give it to people like me, foreigners. And they're rightly so. I mean, the archaeology here should be done by Africans who have a claim on their own history there.
Yeah, I really wonder if there isn't also a level of distrust in archaeology as well for some reason, because it comes from these, historically white universities that are doing the most important archaeological work in South Africa. So that is a bit worrying to me. I mean, even as a South African myself, when I hear of a lost city and all I see, Daily Mail reported on it, Fox News reported on it and all that, I kind of stand back and say, are any of us looking at what's actually being out there? I think that archaeologists like yourself need to bring these stories out way more into the public light, because when a lost city is found in South Africa, I stand back and say, well, if I just watched a YouTube video of an Mfecane that still believes in an empty land myth, then I think we might still have a problem in South Africa. So, talk to me about that.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, archaeology is a colonial discipline. I mean, the beginnings of it, aside from antiquity, treasure hunting, and that sort of stuff, it played a big role in the spread of colonialism and European colonists essentially taking over the past of the countries that they went and colonized. So it has an unfortunate colonial flavor to it. And again, we archaeologists here haven't done enough, as you say, to get beyond that. And a lot of the disciplines and a lot of the writing, a lot of my colleagues and myself, the pressure on us is to write for the international audience, for the Northern Hemisphere, to publish in the top journals. So we're really been neglecting the local communities, and you're right. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they're not exactly attracted to come to archaeology. It still looks very colonial. So that needs to change drastically, and I think you're absolutely right that getting that information out to the public is the way to do it, which I'm hoping to be able to achieve a little bit through this. But it's taking a long time. I mean, we're behind other disciplines, I think, in South Africa. So we have some work to do here.
Yeah. Now, in Kwaneng's case, and it's not even called Kwaneng yet, I mean, but let's just call it Kwaneng whilst we're here. this doesn't end here. Obviously, there's more to come. So just guide us through now the next 2 decades of work as you guys try and really, bring out all the facts. Because now, I mean, you guys have found something, but you say this might take another 2 decades of work. Why is that?
Absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to be a bit disappointing for the general public. With archaeological discoveries, it's that first discovery that's really, wow, something new, something different. And then the archaeologists get down to the detail of, little boring classificatory work and all that stuff, which at that point the public switches off. But it's unfortunately necessary to do that kind of forensic detailed work. For now, for example, I'm thinking one of the big questions is how many people live there. That's really is a PhD topic. One big question is, what was the end of Kweneng like? Did it all disappear at once? That's another PhD topic. What really interests me is that there are 3 or 4 architectural features at Kweneng that we don't see at other sites. And so each of those is again a PhD of getting down to really finding the distribution of these built structures, that style, where does it come from, why is it here, what does it signify, what was it used for. So it's that kind of detailed work. And then of course lots of excavations, more dating, proper dating, but technologically that's a challenge. So it's all of these little projects that will keep us going for a long time. I mean, the site is like 10 kilometers long. It's got at least, we haven't covered the whole thing, but I reckon it's probably about 900 compounds in the whole. So even if you wanted to excavate, let's say a 10% sample, excavating 90 of these compounds is a big job. So there's many, many years of work still to come. If the funding's there, funding is also another issue that's hard to deal with at the moment. But it will get boring for the general public because after that initial discovery, it becomes a slow slog. So it's more interesting for the archaeologists, but we have to make sure to keep the public involved and interested in this.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, it's creating the new myths. The new myths of people we never considered who might have been there, who were there, and you guys are finding them out. And as a South African who's into South African history, archaeology is feeding into that hunger for the knowledge. I want to know what's happening because I mean there are things that are freely available for you to go and read, and there's historical documents that are freely available for you to go and read and kind of contextualize your country. But you guys are doing the work that further contextualizes it, so we can get this incredible picture of South Africa, and that's what I'm really interested in. Do you know of any of your other colleagues that are about to announce some incredible findings or something like that? I want to scoop just for this show specifically.
Yes, I hope there are. I mean, this Lidar technology is spreading. So two or three of my other colleagues have flown missions, or they have people flown the missions for them. But they've flown it over sites that we knew existed already. So it's not a new discovery, but obviously now they have a lot more detail. One of my colleagues I think is in the process of having LiDAR imagery for Great Zimbabwe. And that's, we knew, everybody knows about Great Zimbabwe, but essentially the central district, the royal district of Great Zimbabwe. There's a city there and nobody knows, how big or how many people. So all of that might come out. Is there going to be other lost cities to be found like this? I'm sure. There's probably another dozen out there that we don't know about simply because we haven't seen them properly. So yeah, these kinds of things can come up quite regularly. But at a certain point, that wow factor does wear off a little bit, and the information becomes a little bit more esoteric and detailed, which requires more reading. The big barrier is packaging the information in such a way that it appeals to the general public. And we archaeologists aren't actually trying to do that, which is a pity. We're trying to write these dense journal articles that nobody else can understand. And it's thanks to journalists like yourself and many other good ones that I've met, and I've got a great deal of respect for journalists who are able to take the information and put it out there in a clear, concise manner. I'm learning a lot about how to communicate with the general public. So I think that kind of a partnership needs to be strengthened, because we're no good at putting this out to the general, but we haven't been trained. Or maybe the future courses should involve some kind of, how do you talk to the public?
Yeah, look, I think science journalism and all these kind of things are probably coming up only now. I'm an engineering journalist, trying to make sense of what engineers are saying. So I think it's very, very much the same with archaeology. But you know what, whenever you have something to announce, send it to us. We're putting it out. We want to tell people, listen, there was a lost city 60 kilometers south of Johannesburg. Think about these things when you're thinking about, the political situation we find ourselves in, the way that, politicians can just say something that is not necessarily historically accurate is sometimes something that makes me go, wow, we're kind of glazing over all of this history that you guys are now uncovering. I'm sorry that I spent half the interview with my University of Pretoria emblem in the focus there, but the archaeology coming out of Wits has always been so stellar and amazing. Even when I was on our radio station at UP, doing a lot of the reports there, we saw, we saw Naledi get announced, we saw all of those different things get announced. So you guys are doing really incredible work. Do you have 2 books out that people can purchase by any chance, or do you have any place that people can come and find you in your personal capacity, websites, social media?
Absolutely. I have there's a web platform that you probably know of. It's called academia.edu, and I've got a page there, and I put all my articles and books and everything on there for anybody who wants to download them. And I have a website on this project itself, so there's news that comes out about the project and the things that we find. So that can be essentially, if you type my name into Google search, eventually you'll be able to get to those places. In fact, I have a website, karimsadr.com, so that will be a portal to all of these other bits and pieces. And again, some of it may not be the kind of thing that the general public would enjoy reading, because it's too dense and all that. But speaking of University of Pretoria, they're great at archaeology.
Okay.
The great Zimbabwe Lidar work that I was talking about is a colleague at UP, so they're very good colleagues here.
Yeah, look, I think we had a hold on the golden rhino for a while. It was in one of our...
And it's still there. Yeah, the work at Mapungubwe was initially done by researchers from UP. Now that's a very strong. That's one of our strongest competitors. Let's say.
Well, I'm an alumnus from there, so don't worry. You don't have to worry about competition on this end. I just genuinely wanted to know about a lost city that your layman, your regular day South African didn't know about, and we got to inform them. Professor Karim Sadr, thanks for joining us on the Quintessential Show, and I hope that you continue bringing us just valuable information about your archaeological findings in South Africa. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Witwatersrand. Thanks, it was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cheerio. Goodbye.
Yes. Bye.